The snow wasn't supposed to fall this hard in Grayport City. Cassian Blackridge stepped into the alley, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. His black suit cut sharp lines against the brick walls, every thread immaculate despite the weather. Tattoos crawled up his neck from beneath his collar, a dragon's tail curling toward his jaw, symbols only those in his world understood. He wasn't here for charity. He was here because someone owed him money and debts in his territory didn't go unpaid. The string lights overhead swayed in the wind, casting shadows that danced across wet pavement. Somewhere behind him, the city hummed with late-night traffic, but here, in this narrow passage between buildings he owned, silence pressed down like a physical weight. Something felt wrong. Cassian's hand moved instinctively toward the gun holstered beneath his jacket. His eyes scanned the darkness, dumpsters overflowing with garbage, cardboard boxes stacked against rusted fire escapes, puddles reflecting golden light. Then he saw them. "Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is." Two small bodies lay curled together on flattened cardboard beside a dumpster. Children, little boys maybe 6 or 7 years old, dressed in thin yellow shirts and blue shorts that had no business being worn in January. Their sneakers were soaked through, laces caked with mud and slush. Cassian stopped walking. His pulse didn't quicken. He'd trained himself out of that reaction years ago, but his jaw tightened. He'd seen plenty of things in these streets: violence, betrayal, desperation, but this was different. The twins were identical. Same brown hair matted against their foreheads, same flushed cheeks, same small hands clasped together like they were afraid to let go even in sleep. One boy had his arm thrown over the other, protecting him from the cold that was already turning their lips blue. Cassian stood there, the most feared man in Grayport City, staring at two children who shouldn't exist in his world. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. The wind picked up, scattering fresh snow across the alley. It settled on the boys' hair, their shoulders, their bare legs. Neither of them stirred. Cassian's fingers flexed at his sides. He could walk away, should walk away. People left problems in alleys all the time, hoping someone else would deal with them. That's how the world worked. But his feet didn't move. He thought about the money he'd come to collect, the meeting scheduled in 20 minutes, the reputation he'd spent a decade building: ruthless, efficient, untouchable. Then one of the twins shifted. A soft sound escaped the child's mouth, not a word, just a whimper, small and broken, the kind of noise that came from somewhere deep in the chest where fear lived. Cassian's hands curled into fists. He took a step forward. Then another. The snow crunched beneath his expensive Italian shoes, each step deliberate, measured. He reached the edge of the cardboard and stopped, looking down at faces too young to be out here, too innocent to understand what kind of city they'd been abandoned in. His shadow fell across them both. The protective twin, the one with his arm stretched out, had a small bruise forming on his wrist. The other boy's breathing sounded shallow, raspy, wrong. Cassian knelt down slowly, his knee touching the wet pavement. Cold seeped through the fabric of his pants, but he barely noticed. Up close, he could see their chests rising and falling in uneven rhythm, could smell the sour stench of the dumpster mixing with something sweeter, children's shampoo maybe, from days ago when someone still cared enough to bathe them. His hand hovered in the air, inches from the nearest boy's shoulder. Every instinct screamed at him to pull back, to stand up, to make the call and have someone else handle this. But that whimper echoed in his head. Cassian Blackridge, the man who'd ordered hits without blinking, who'd watched enemies beg and felt nothing, found his hand trembling. He pulled it back sharply. What was he doing? He rose to his feet, turned halfway toward the alley's exit. His men were waiting. The city wouldn't run itself. These boys were tragic, sure, but tragedy happened every day in Grayport. You couldn't save everyone. You couldn't save anyone if you wanted to survive. He took one step away. The wind howled, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Cassian stopped. He looked back over his shoulder at the twins, still motionless, still clinging to each other like it was the only thing keeping them alive. Then he saw it. Tucked beneath the cardboard, partially hidden by the older boy's leg, was a corner of white paper, an envelope held down by a small rock. Cassian's blood turned to ice. What happened next when Cassian opened that envelope? Drop your thoughts below. Cassian crouched again, this time with purpose. His fingers closed around the envelope, yanking it free from beneath the cardboard. The paper was expensive, thick, cream-colored, the kind used for formal invitations or legal threats. Water had darkened one corner, but the seal remained intact. He flipped it over. No name, no address, just a red wax seal pressed with a symbol he recognized immediately, a broken crown. His jaw clenched. Someone had left this here deliberately for him to find, which meant someone knew he'd come to this alley tonight, knew his route, knew his schedule. He tore the envelope open. Inside was a single photograph, slightly bent at the edges. The image showed the same two boys, awake this time, eyes wide with terror, being dragged through a doorway by a man whose face sent rage flooding through Cassian's veins. Marrow Pike. The name tasted like poison in his mind. Pike was a trafficker, a bottom feeder who operated in the gaps between territories, moving children and vulnerable Omegas through underground networks. Cassian had heard whispers about him for months but never had enough evidence to act. Until now. He flipped the photograph over. Written in neat black ink across the back were 7 words that made his blood boil. Even kings overlook what they step over. Cassian's hand crushed the photo's edges. This wasn't random, this wasn't some desperate parent leaving their children in a safe place. This was a message, a challenge, someone testing whether the great Cassian Blackridge, the alpha who controlled half of Grayport's underworld, would actually stop for 2 abandoned children. Someone betting he wouldn't. His phone buzzed again, this time he answered without looking at the screen. "Change of plans," he said, his voice cold enough to freeze the air around him. "I need a medical team at the East Alley behind Riverside, now." "Boss, the meeting. Cancel it." He hung up. Cassian shoved the photograph into his jacket pocket and turned his attention back to the twins. Now that he knew what he was looking at, details jumped out at him, the way their clothes hung loose like they'd lost weight recently, the dirt under their fingernails, the small cut healing on one boy's ankle. These children had been through hell. And someone had dumped them here like garbage, betting that Cassian would walk past without a second glance. He shrugged off his coat, revealing the full spread of tattoos across his chest and arms, a phoenix rising from flames, a wolf mid-hunt, names written in script along his ribs. The cold bit into him immediately through his white dress shirt, but he ignored it. Carefully, gently, he draped the coat over both boys. The fabric swallowed them whole, expensive cashmere settling over thin limbs and shallow breathing. One twin, the protective one, stirred slightly, his small hand clutching at the coat's edge like he was afraid someone would take it away. Cassian's throat tightened. He checked the other boy next, the one whose breathing sounded wrong. His forehead was burning hot beneath Cassian's palm, fever raging unchecked. The child's lips had gone pale, his eyelids fluttering like he was trapped in a nightmare he couldn't escape. "Come on," Cassian muttered, adjusting the coat to cover them better. "Stay with me." Footsteps echoed from the alley's entrance. Cassian's head snapped up, one hand moving toward his gun, but he relaxed when he recognized the silhouettes. 3 of his men, Dante, Marcus, and a younger enforcer named Jay, jogged toward him, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock when they saw what he was kneeling beside. "Boss," Dante's voice carried disbelief. "What?" "Medical team. 2 minutes out." "Good." Cassian stood, his presence filling the space like a storm about to break. "I want every camera in a 3-block radius pulled. I want to know who was in this alley in the last 12 hours. I want backgrounds on anyone who's been near this location." Marcus stepped closer, staring at the twins. "Are they alive?" "Barely." Cassian's voice dropped to something deadly quiet. "And when we're done making sure they stay that way, I want Marrow Pike found. I don't care if you have to turn this entire city upside down. Find him." Jay, the youngest, looked between Cassian and the children. "What do we do with the kids?" Cassian didn't answer right away. He looked down at the twins again, 2 small bodies huddled under his coat, clinging to each other because that's all they had left in the world. Something shifted in his chest. Something he'd thought died years ago when he learned that mercy got you killed in this business. But looking at those boys, he realized mercy wasn't the right word. This was justice. We save them, Cassian said finally, and then we make sure whoever did this never touches another child again. The protective twins suddenly coughed, a wet, rattling sound that echoed off the brick walls. Will the twins survive the night? Comment what you think happens next. The coughing didn't stop. It ripped through the smaller boy's body, violent and desperate, his tiny frame shaking beneath Cassian's coat. His brother stirred beside him, making a soft, frightened noise even in sleep. Cassian dropped to one knee again, his hands hovering uselessly above the sick child. He'd killed men with those hands, broken bones, ended lives without hesitation. But he didn't know how to stop a 7-year-old from drowning in his own lungs. "Where's that medical team?" His voice came out harder than he intended. Dante was already on the phone, barking orders into the receiver. Marcus moved closer, his massive frame blocking the wind, trying to shield the boys from the cold that kept pouring into the alley. The coughing fit finally subsided, leaving the child gasping for air, small wheezes escaping between trembling lips. His eyes cracked open for just a second, brown, glassy, unfocused, before falling shut again. Cassian's jaw locked. He'd seen dying before, knew what it looked like when someone's body started giving up. This boy was close, too close. "Boss," Jay's voice cut through the tension, "why'd someone leave them here in your territory?" Cassian pulled the photograph from his pocket, holding it up so the streetlight caught the image. Pike's face stared back at them, frozen mid-drag as he hauled the terrified twins through a doorway. "Because someone wanted to see what I'd do," Cassian said quietly. "Wanted to prove I'm the monster everyone says I am." Marcus took the photo, his expression darkening. "Pike's been moving kids through the East Corridor for months. We've been trying to pin him down." "Not anymore," Cassian stood, his presence expanding until it seemed to fill the entire alley. "He made this personal." A memory surfaced, uninvited and sharp. Cassian was 8 years old again, standing in a different alley in a different city. His stomach hurt from hunger, his clothes too thin for winter, watching other children walk past with parents who held their hands and carried them when they got tired. No one had stopped for him. No one had looked twice. He'd learned early that the world didn't care about abandoned children. You either survived or you didn't, and mercy was just a pretty word people used to feel better about doing nothing. He'd built his entire empire on that belief. But staring at these twins, these boys who looked like they'd never hurt anyone, who'd been thrown away like trash, something cracked inside that carefully constructed wall. The protective twin shifted again, his small hand reaching out blindly until it found his brother's arm. Even unconscious, even sick and freezing, he was still trying to hold on. Cassian's chest tightened. "Boss," Dante's voice pulled him back to the present. "You good?" He almost laughed. Good? Nothing about this was good. These children had been used as weapons in someone's game, left to die just to prove a point about power and control. And Cassian had almost walked away. Almost proved them right. "I'm fine," he lied. Headlights flooded the alley as 2 black SUVs pulled up, followed by a white van with tinted windows. Doors opened, and a woman in a dark coat jumped out, medical bag already in hand. Dr. Raina Cross, one of the few people Cassian trusted completely. She took one look at the twins and dropped beside them without a word, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she checked vitals, airways, temperature. "Fever's at 104, she muttered. "Possible pneumonia, severe dehydration, signs of prolonged exposure." Her eyes met Cassian's and he saw the anger there. "How long have they been out here?" "I don't know." "Well, they're lucky you found them," she signaled to her assistant. "Get the stretcher, we need to move now." "Lucky." Cassian watched as they carefully transferred the boys onto a padded stretcher, keeping them together, keeping his coat wrapped around them like armor against the world. Lucky implied chance, coincidence. But nothing about this was random. He looked down at the cardboard where the twins had been lying, at the crushed envelope, at the photograph still clutched in Marcus's hand. Someone had orchestrated this entire thing, had stolen these children, tortured them, starved them, then left them in the one place Cassian would eventually pass. A test. A message. A declaration of war wrapped in innocence and suffering. The stretcher was loaded into the van. Dr. Cross climbed in beside the twins, already starting IVs, wrapping them in heated blankets. "Where are you taking them?" Cassian asked. "Private facility on 4th. I'll keep them stable until we know what we're dealing with." He nodded. "I'll follow." But before he could move, Jay spoke up again. "Boss, what about Pike? If we start tearing through the city looking for him, people are gonna notice." Cassian turned slowly, and even his own men took a step back from whatever they saw in his expression. "Let them notice," he said softly. "I want everyone in this city to know exactly what happens when you use children as weapons." The van doors closed. Cassian stood in the empty alley surrounded by his men, snowflakes settling on his shoulders and hair. Without his coat, the cold was brutal, but he barely felt it. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. He opened it. One sentence, no signature. "Compassion makes you weak." Cassian's thumb hovered over the delete button. Then he smiled, sharp, dangerous, nothing warm about it. He typed back 4 words. "You're about to find out." What will Cassian do when he finds Pike? Drop your predictions below. The private medical facility smelled like antiseptic and fear. Cassian stood outside the observation window, watching through reinforced glass as Dr. Cross worked on the twins. They'd been separated onto different beds, the first time they'd been apart since he found them, and even unconscious, both boys looked distressed. The protective one kept reaching out, searching for his brother with small, desperate movements. It broke something inside Cassian he didn't know still existed. "Preliminary blood work shows malnutrition and signs of sedation," Dr. Cross said through the intercom. "Someone's been drugging them, probably to keep them compliant during transport." Cassian's hands curled into fists against the glass. Behind him, Dante scrolled through security footage on a tablet, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light. "Got something, boss? Camera 3 blocks east caught a black cargo van stopping in that alley around 6 p.m. 2 men got out, carried something to the dumpster area, then left. Plates. Stolen, reported missing 3 days ago from a lot in the warehouse district." Of course they were. "What about the men's?" Dante zoomed in on the grainy image, but both figures wore masks and bulky jackets that disguised their builds. "Professional, careful." "Can't id them from this," Dante admitted. "But the van itself is registered to a shell company. Took some digging, but the money trail leads back to one of Pike's known associates." Cassian's jaw tightened. "Name?" "Dion Richter, small-time enforcer, handles Pike's dirty work when things need to stay off the books." "Where is he?" "Unknown. He hasn't been seen at any of his usual spots in 48 hours. Which meant Pike knew this was coming, had planned ahead, covered his tracks, made sure there'd be distance between him and the crime. Smart. But not smart enough. Cassian turned from the window, his mind already working through the next steps. Pike operated through proxies and intermediaries, always keeping 3 layers between himself and anything illegal. Taking him down would require more than brute force. It would require strategy. "Pull every favor we have with the transit authority," Cassian said. "I want toll camera footage, traffic stops. Anything that shows movement patterns for vehicles registered to Pike's network. He had to move those boys somewhere before dumping them. Find the route." Marcus appeared in the doorway, phone pressed to his ear. He ended the call and crossed the room in 3 long strides. "We got a hit on Pike's location," he said. "Anonymous tip called into one of our information lines, says he's holed up at the Riverside Hotel, room 412. Cassian's eyes narrowed. "Anonymous." "Yeah, caller used to burner, untraceable." Everything in Cassian's gut screamed trap. Pike was too careful to let his location slip, and anonymous tips were how enemies drew you into ambushes. But the twins were evidence, living proof of Pike's trafficking operation, which meant Pike needed them gone and Cassian eliminated. 2 birds, 1 carefully laid trap. "It's bait," Cassian said. "Obviously," Marcus crossed his arms. "Question is, do we bite?" Cassian looked back at the observation window. The protective twin was thrashing now, fighting against the restraints Dr. Cross had gently secured to keep the IVs in place. His mouth moved, forming silent words, calling for his brother maybe, or crying out against nightmares only he could see. The other boy lay still, too still, his small chest barely rising. Cassian made his decision. "We bite," he said, "but not the way they expect." He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he rarely used, a contact so buried in his network that even Pike wouldn't know about her. 3 rings, then a woman's voice, sharp and alert despite the late hour. "This is unexpected." "Shayla," Cassian said, "I need surveillance on the Riverside Hotel, full coverage, thermal imaging, exit points, and I need it done quietly." "Time frame?" 20 minutes. A pause. "You're calling in the favor." "Yes." "Then you'll owe me." "Put it on my tab." She hung up without another word. Cassian pocketed his phone and turned to his men. "Dante, Marcus, you're with me. Jay, stay here. If anything happens to those boys, if anyone even looks at this building wrong, you call me immediately." Jay nodded, already moving toward the observation window like a guard dog settling into position. Cassian started toward the exit, but Dr. Cross's voice stopped him. "Cassian." He turned. She stood in the doorway of the observation room, still wearing blood-stained gloves, exhaustion written in the lines around her eyes. "These boys have been through hell," she said quietly. "Whatever you're about to do, make sure it's worth it." "It will be." "I mean it." Her voice hardened. "They're stable for now, but trauma like this doesn't just heal with medicine. They're going to need safety, consistency, someone who doesn't disappear when things get complicated." Cassian held her gaze. "I'm not going anywhere." Something shifted in her expression, surprise maybe or hope. She nodded slowly. "Good, because that protective one," he woke up for a few seconds while we were working on him. "You know what he said." Cassian's chest tightened. "What?" "He asked if the man who gave them the warm coat was coming back." Dr. Cross pulled off her gloves. "He's 7 years old, Cassian, and you're already the only person he trusts." The words hit harder than any bullet. Cassian turned away before she could see what they did to his expression. "I'll be back," he said. Then he walked out into the cold night, where justice waited to be delivered in blood and broken bones. Behind him, through the observation glass, the protective twin finally stopped fighting. His small hand uncurled, resting against empty air. "Waiting." "What's waiting for Cassian at the Riverside Hotel? Tell us what you think." The Riverside Hotel rose 12 stories into Grayport's skyline, all cracked concrete and flickering neon. Cassian sat in the back of his SUV, parked 3 blocks away, watching the thermal imaging feed on Dante's laptop. Heat signatures bloomed across the screen, guests in their rooms, staff moving through hallways, the bright cluster of bodies on the 4th floor that marked Pike's location. "Too many bodies." "Count?" Cassian asked. 6, maybe 7, Shayla's voice came through the phone speaker. "They're positioned at both stairwell exits and the elevator, classic ambush formation." Marcus checked his weapon in the passenger seat. "Want us to go in loud?" "No." Cassian's eyes tracked the heat signatures, looking for patterns, weaknesses. "Pike knows we're coming. He's counting on us to kick down the door like animals." "So what's the play?" Cassian was quiet for a moment, thinking through angles and possibilities. Pike wanted a confrontation, something violent and public that he could spin into evidence of Cassian's brutality. Proof that the great Cassian Blackridge was losing control, making emotional decisions, becoming a liability to the very power structure he'd built. But Pike had made one critical mistake. He'd hurt children to make his point. And that changed everything. "We don't go to him," Cassian said finally, "we make him come to us." He pulled out his phone and opened a secure messaging app, typing quickly. Within seconds, messages went out to 5 different contacts: journalists, police commissioners, social workers, people who owed Cassian favors or feared him enough to act when called. Each message contained the same thing: the photograph of Pike dragging the twins, along with their current location in the medical facility, evidence of trafficking, and a promise that more information would follow. "What are you doing?" Dante asked. "Changing the narrative." Cassian hit send on the final message. "Pike wanted to expose me as a monster. Instead, I'm going to show the world exactly what he is." His phone buzzed immediately. News alerts started flooding in, breaking reports about child trafficking, demands for investigation, public outrage spreading through social media like wildfire. On the laptop screen, the heat signatures on the fourth floor started moving, frantic, disorganized. Pike's phone was ringing. "He's panicking," Shayla confirmed. "Multiple incoming calls to that room. Looks like someone's getting some bad news." Cassian watched the signatures scatter, two heading for the stairwell, one toward the elevator, the rest clustering around what had to be Pike himself. "He's running," Marcus said. "Let him." Cassian's voice was cold. "I want every exit covered. He doesn't leave that building until I say so." Dante made the calls, mobilizing teams positioned around the hotel's perimeter. Within minutes, the trap reversed. Pike's ambush became his cage. But Cassian wasn't done. He opened another message, this time to the twins' medical records that Dr. Cross had compiled. Detailed documentation of their injuries, the drugs in their system, evidence of prolonged captivity and abuse. He attached it to an email addressed to the district attorney's office. Subject line: Justice for the Forgotten Ones. His finger hovered over the send button. This was it, the moment where he chose between the old Cassian, the one who handled problems with violence and intimidation, and something else, something he didn't have a name for yet. Something the twins deserved. He hit send. "Boss," Jay's voice crackled through the phone, "we got a problem at the facility." Cassian's blood went cold. "What kind of problem?" "The protective twin, he's awake, and he's asking for you." "Will Cassian get to the twins before Pike escapes?" Comment below. The protective twins' eyes were open. Cassian pushed through the medical facility doors, his heart hammering in a way it hadn't during any firefight or negotiation. Jay stood outside the observation room, looking rattled. "He woke up screaming," Jay said, "kept asking where his brother was, where the warm coat man went. Dr. Cross tried to calm him down, but he won't settle." Through the glass, Cassian could see the small figure sitting upright in bed, trembling despite the heated blankets wrapped around him. The boy's brown eyes were wide, darting around the room like he expected monsters to emerge from the corners. Cassian didn't hesitate. He opened the door and stepped inside. The twins' head snapped toward him, and for a moment terror flashed across that small face. Then recognition hit, and something else, hope, desperate and fragile. "You came back," the boy whispered. Cassian crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside the bed, bringing himself down to eye level. Up close, he could see the remnants of tears on the child's cheeks, the way his small hands gripped the blanket like a lifeline. "I'm here," Cassian said quietly. "You're safe now." "My brother," the boy's voice cracked. "Where's Khari? They took him away and I can't." "He's right there." Cassian pointed to the bed 6 feet away where the other twin lay sleeping, hooked up to monitors that beeped steadily. "His name is Khari." The protective twin nodded frantically. "And I'm Amari. Is he okay?" He was coughing so much and he wouldn't wake up and... "Khari's going to be fine," Cassian interrupted gently. "The doctors are taking care of him, he just needs rest." Amari's eyes filled with fresh tears. "The bad men said nobody would look for us, they said we weren't worth finding." Cassian's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "They lied. But we were on the street for so long and people just walked past and..." Amari's breathing quickened, panic rising. "What if they come back? What if they take us again?" Cassian reached out slowly, giving Amari time to pull away if he wanted. When the boy didn't move, Cassian placed his hand on the small shoulder, feeling how badly Amari was shaking. "Listen to me," Cassian said, his voice carrying a weight that made even grown men pay attention. "No one is taking you anywhere, not now, not ever, do you understand?" Amari searched his face, looking for lies, for false promises. Whatever he saw there made him nod slowly. "You're the coat man," Amari said. "You gave us your coat when we were cold." "I did. Why?" The question hit Cassian harder than any accusation. Why? Because something inside him had cracked when he saw them lying there. Because walking away would have made him exactly what Pike thought he was. Because these boys deserved better than a world that treated children like garbage. "Because you needed it," Cassian said simply. Amari stared at him for a long moment. Then, moving slowly like he expected to be pushed away, the 7-year-old leaned forward and wrapped his thin arms around Cassian's neck. The embrace was desperate, trusting, everything Cassian didn't deserve. His arms came up automatically, carefully holding Amari like he was made of glass. The boy smelled like hospital soap and antiseptic, but underneath, Cassian caught hints of childhood, strawberry shampoo from before, playground dirt, innocence that should never have been touched by violence. "Thank you," Amari whispered against his shoulder. "Thank you for not walking away." Something inside Cassian's chest cracked wide open. Dr. Cross appeared in the doorway, her expression softening at the scene. She held up a syringe filled with clear liquid, mild sedative, probably something to help Amari rest. But before she could enter, Cassian's phone buzzed violently in his pocket. "Marcus, urgent." Cassian gently pulled back from the embrace. "Amari, I need you to do something for me." The boy nodded. "I need you to rest, let the doctors help you get strong again, can you do that?" "Are you leaving?" Fear crept back into Amari's voice. "Only for a little while, I have to take care of something important, but I promise," Cassian met those brown eyes directly, "I promise I'm coming back." "You promise?" "I promise." Amari seemed to consider this, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but you have to bring your coat back, it's really warm." Despite everything, Cassian almost smiled. "Deal." Dr. Cross moved in as Cassian stood, her hands already preparing the IV line for the sedative. Amari watched Cassian until his eyes grew heavy, until sleep pulled him under again. Cassian stepped into the hallway and answered Marcus's call. "Pike's moving," Marcus said without preamble. "He's trying to slip out through the service entrance dressed as hotel staff." "Stop him." "Already on it, but boss, he's not alone. He's got Dion Richter with him, and Richter's carrying something, looks like a go bag full of evidence." Cassian's mind raced. Evidence meant documentation, records, proof of the trafficking operation. If Pike destroyed it, half the case collapsed. "Do not let them leave that building," Cassian ordered. "I'm on my way." He ended the call and turned to Jay. "No one gets near these boys. I don't care if the president himself shows up. Nobody gets through that door." Jay straightened. "Yes, sir." Cassian headed for the exit, but Dr. Cross called after him. "You told that child you'd come back," she said. "Don't make a liar out of yourself." "I won't." He pushed through the doors into the cold night, where justice waited with sharp teeth and no forgiveness. The SUV roared to life, tires screeching as Dante floored it toward the Riverside Hotel. Cassian sat in the back, checking his weapon, mind already 3 steps ahead. Pike had gambled everything on Cassian being the monster everyone expected. Time to show him what real monsters looked like when you threatened their family. Will Cassian catch Pike before the evidence disappears? Drop your thoughts below. Pike hit the pavement running. Cassian's SUV screeched around the corner just in time to see the trafficker burst from the hotel's service entrance, Dion Richter close behind. Both men wore stolen maintenance uniforms, but the bulging duffel bag in Richter's grip gave them away. "There," Cassian said. Dante didn't need further instruction. The SUV jumped the curb, cutting off Pike's escape route. Cassian was out before the vehicle fully stopped, his presence filling the narrow alley like a storm rolling in. Pike froze, his eyes going wide. "Going somewhere?" Cassian asked quietly. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Richter made the fatal mistake of reaching for the gun tucked in his waistband. Marcus was faster. The enforcer appeared from the shadows, his weapon already drawn, aimed center mass. "Don't." Richter's hand stopped midway, hovering over the gun like he was calculating odds he couldn't win. "The bag," Cassian said. "Put it down." "You don't know what you're dealing with," Pike said, finding his voice. His face was slick with sweat despite the cold. "This goes higher than you think, people who make you look like a street thug." "I'm counting on it," Cassian took a step forward. "Because when I'm done with you, I want everyone in that chain to know what happens when you use children as weapons." Pike's jaw tightened. They were inventory business, nothing personal. The word inventory made something dark and violent rise in Cassian's chest. His hand moved to his gun, fingers curling around the grip. "Those boys have names," Cassian said, his voice dropping to something deadly. "Amari and Khari, and they're not inventory, they're children who trusted the wrong people." "Sentimental?" Pike actually smiled. That's new for you, Blackridge. Word on the street is you're getting soft. First you hesitate on the Jenkins contract, now you're playing hero for some Omegas abandoned. Cassian moved. 1 second he was standing 10 feet away. The next, his fist connected with Pike's jaw, sending the trafficker sprawling against the brick wall. Blood sprayed from Pike's mouth, his eyes rolling back briefly before focus returned. Their mother didn't abandon them, Cassian said, standing over Pike's crumpled form. You took them, drugged them, starved them, left them to die in an alley like they were nothing. Pike spat blood, prove it. Already did. Cassian pulled out his phone, showing the screen. News alerts covered every major outlet, photos of the twins, medical reports, whistleblower testimony from people in Pike's network who'd turned the moment they saw which way the wind was blowing. Your entire operation is being dismantled as we speak. Federal agents are hitting your warehouses, your safe houses, every location we could find. The color drained from Pike's face. How? You thought you were testing me, Cassian continued. Thought you could expose me as a hypocrite who preaches order but ignores suffering, but you made one critical error. What's that? You assumed I'd play by the old rules. Cassian crouched down, getting eye level with the man who'd hurt Amari and Khari. I spent 10 years building an empire on fear and control. Turns out justice works a lot faster. Richter made another move for his weapon. This time Dante fired. Not a kill shot, just enough to shatter Richter's kneecap and send him screaming to the pavement. The duffel bag tumbled from his grip, spilling documents and hard drives across the wet ground. Marcus was already moving, securing the evidence before it could be damaged. Pike tried to stand, but Cassian's hand on his shoulder kept him pinned against the wall. You wanted to know if I'd walk past those boys, Cassian said, if I'd prove that power matters more than people. Well, congratulations, you got your answer. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Pike's eyes widened. You called the cops. I called everyone. Cassian stood, brushing off his hands like he'd touched something dirty. The police, the FBI, Child Protective Services, every journalist who's been trying to crack trafficking rings in this city. They're all very interested in talking to you. You can't do this, Pike said, desperation creeping into his voice. We had an understanding. Underground business stays underground. You break that rule, the whole system. The system, Cassian interrupted, just changed. Blue and red lights flooded the alley as police vehicles surrounded the scene. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, moving with the efficiency of people who'd been briefed and prepared. A woman in a dark suit stepped forward, Detective Shanice Morrison, one of the few cops in Grayport who wasn't on anyone's payroll. She looked at the scene, at Pike bleeding against the wall, at the evidence scattered across the pavement. Mr. Blackridge, she said neutrally. Detective? Cassian stepped back, giving her space to work. I believe you're looking for these two, Merrow Pike and Dion Richter, wanted in connection with child trafficking, kidnapping, and attempted murder. Morrison's eyes narrowed, and you just happened to find them. I happened to find 2 7-year-old boys left to die in my territory, Cassian corrected. These men are responsible, the evidence is right there. Marcus handed over the duffel bag. Morrison looked inside, her expression hardening with each document she pulled out. This is enough to put them away for life, she said quietly. Good. She looked at Cassian for a long moment, clearly trying to figure out his angle. In her world, men like him didn't hand over criminals to the police. They handled problems their own way in dark alleys where bodies disappeared. But the evidence was ironclad, the case was gift-wrapped, and 2 children were alive because of it. Finally, Morrison nodded to her officers, take them in. Pike fought as they hauled him to his feet, screaming threats and promises of revenge. Richter just whimpered, clutching his shattered knee. As they were loaded into squad cars, Pike locked eyes with Cassian one last time. This isn't over, he said. Yes, Cassian replied calmly, it is. The cars pulled away, sirens fatting into the night. Cassian stood in the empty alley surrounded by his men, feeling the weight of what he'd just done. He'd broken the unwritten rules of the underworld, called in authorities, chosen public justice over private retribution. People would talk, some would see it as weakness, others as evolution. He didn't care. Boss Dante's voice cut through his thoughts. What now? Cassian pulled out his phone, looking at the medical facility's address. Now he said, I keep a promise. What happens when Cassian returns to the twins? Comment what you think. The news broke before sunrise. Cassian sat in the medical facility's waiting room watching footage play across the mounted television. Every channel covered the same story: massive trafficking ring dismantled, children rescued from 3 separate locations, federal agents praising local cooperation. Pike's face appeared on screen, handcuffed, being led into the precinct. The anchor's voice called him a monster, a predator who'd exploited the vulnerable for profit. They weren't wrong. But what they didn't know, what the cameras couldn't capture, was the real story. The one about 2 boys named Amari and Khari sleeping peacefully down the hall, finally safe after months of hell. Cassian's phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the arrests. Messages from allies, enemies, neutral parties, all wanting to know the same thing: what changed. He ignored them all. Dr. Cross emerged from the observation room, pulling off her surgical mask. She looked exhausted but satisfied. Khari's fever broke, she said. He's stable, should wake up within the hour. Relief flooded through Cassian's chest. And Amari. Asking for you every 10 minutes, she almost smiled. That boy's got trust issues with everyone except you, won't even let the nurses check his vitals without asking if you approved it first. Cassian stood. Can I see them? That's why I came to get you. He followed her down the sterile hallway, past rooms filled with expensive medical equipment and round-the-clock security he'd personally arranged. No one was getting near these children without going through him first. The observation room's door opened quietly. Both twins were awake now, sitting together on Khari's bed despite Dr. Cross's probably repeated instructions to stay separated. Amari had his arm around his brother, protective even here, even safe. Khari looked up when Cassian entered, his brown eyes still glassy from fever but alert, aware. You're the coat man, Khari said, his voice scratchy. That's what everyone keeps calling me, Cassian replied. Amari said you promised to come back. Khari's hand found his brother's. People don't usually keep promises to us. The words hit like bullets. Cassian pulled up a chair and sat down, meeting both boys at eye level. Well, I'm not most people. Are you a good guy or a bad guy? Khari asked with the blunt honesty only children possessed. Amari nudged him. Don't be rude. It's okay, Cassian considered the question seriously. I've done things I'm not proud of, hurt people who probably deserved it, built an empire on fear because I thought that's what strength looked like. Both boys watched him processing. But then I found you two in that alley, Cassian continued. And I realized something: real strength isn't about how many people fear you, it's about what you choose to protect when nobody's watching. So you're a good guy now, Khari pressed. I'm trying to be. Amari's grip tightened on his brother. What happens to us now? Do we go back to? His voice broke. We don't have anywhere to go. Dr. Cross shifted in the doorway, clearly wondering the same thing. Cassian had spent the last 6 hours thinking about this exact question. The logical answer was foster care. Let the system handle it. 2 orphaned children weren't his responsibility. But then he remembered Amari's arms around his neck. Khari's question about good guys and bad guys. The way they'd held each other in that alley like the world had already forgotten them. You're not going into the system, Cassian said. Then where? Amari asked. Cassian took a breath. This was insane, reckless, everything his old self would have called a weakness. You're staying with me, he said, if you want to. The twins stared at him like he'd spoken another language. You want us? Khari's voice was so small, so full of disbelief it broke Cassian's heart. Yeah, Cassian said simply, I want you. But we're broken, Amari whispered. The bad men said we were damaged goods, that nobody would. Stop! Cassian's voice came out harder than he intended, but he softened it immediately. You're not broken, you're survivors, and anyone who says different doesn't deserve to be in your life. Tears spilled down Amari's cheeks. Khari buried his face in his brother's shoulder. We can really stay? Amari asked. As long as you want. Forever. Cassian felt the weight of that word. Forever meant responsibility. Forever meant changing his entire life, his priorities, his definition of what mattered. forever meant becoming someone these boys could count on. Forever, he confirmed. The twins looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations only siblings understood. Then, moving together, they slid off the bed and crossed the small space to where Cassian sat. Amari hugged him first, followed immediately by Khari. Two small bodies pressed against him, trusting him with everything they had left. Cassian's arms came around them both, holding them like he could shield them from every bad thing the world might throw their way. "Thank you," Amari said. "Thank you," Khari echoed. "You don't have to thank me," Cassian said quietly. "Yes, we do," Amari pulled back just enough to look up at him. "You're the first person who stopped, the first one who cared." Outside the observation room, Dr. Cross wiped at her eyes. Down the hall, Jay stood guard, making sure nobody interrupted this moment. Across the city, news anchors praised Cassian Blackridge for his cooperation with authorities, never knowing the full truth. And somewhere in a distant facility, a mute Omega with purple hair woke from a nightmare, his heart pounding, sensing something had shifted in the universe. His children were alive, and fate was only beginning to weave its threads. But that was a story for another day. What kind of father will Cassian become? Share your predictions below. The medical facility released the twins 3 days later. Cassian stood in the parking lot, watching as Dr. Cross went through final discharge instructions with Amari and Khari. Both boys wore new clothes, soft hoodies, warm pants, sneakers that actually fit. Small things that shouldn't have mattered but somehow meant everything. "Remember," Dr. Cross said, kneeling to their level, "if you start feeling sick again, you tell Mr. Blackridge immediately. No being tough, no pretending you're fine." "We will," Amari promised. Khari nodded, then surprised everyone by hugging Dr. Cross. "Thank you for fixing us." She blinked back tears. "You were never broken, sweetheart, just hurt, there's a difference." The boys climbed into Cassian's SUV, their small hands gripping the seatbelts like they still couldn't quite believe this was real, that someone actually wanted them. Cassian slid into the driver's seat, catching Dante's eye in the rearview mirror. His second-in-command sat in the passenger seat, still adjusting to this new reality where his boss came with a ready-made family. "Everyone ready?" Cassian asked. "Where are we going?" Khari asked. "Home." The word felt strange on Cassian's tongue. He'd had apartments, safe houses, places to sleep between operations, but home, that implied something permanent, something worth protecting. The drive took 20 minutes through Grayport streets. The twins pressed their faces against the windows, watching the city transform from industrial warehouses to residential neighborhoods with actual trees and sidewalks. Cassian pulled up to a 3-story house in a quiet cul-de-sac. Nothing flashy, just a solid structure with a fenced yard and enough space for 2 boys to grow up without tripping over his underworld business. He'd bought it 2 days ago, cash, no questions asked. "This is ours," Amari's voice carried wonder and disbelief. "This is ours," Cassian confirmed. Inside, the house still smelled like fresh paint and new furniture. Cassian had hired people to set it up: beds, dressers, a living room with a couch big enough for all 3 of them, a kitchen stocked with food that didn't come from takeout containers. The twins explored slowly, touching everything like they expected it to disappear. "There's 2 bedrooms upstairs," Cassian said. "You can share one or take separate rooms, your choice." "Together," both boys said simultaneously. Of course, they'd spent months being each other's only constant. Separating them now would be cruel. Cassian showed them to the larger bedroom where 2 beds sat side by side, already made with thick comforters and more pillows than any kid needed. Their eyes went wide. "This is really ours?" Khari asked for the 3rd time. "Really yours." Amari walked to the window, looking out at the backyard. "Can we go outside?" "Whenever you want." For the next hour, Cassian watched as the twins slowly relaxed. They tested the beds, explored the closet filled with new clothes, discovered the bathroom with its deep tub and soft towels. Small luxuries that most kids took for granted, but these 2 treated like treasures. When they finally came back downstairs, Khari's expression had shifted to something serious. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Anything." "What about our mamas?" The question hung in the air. Cassian had been dreading this conversation. Dr. Cross had found records. The twins were born to an Omega named Zaire who disappeared 6 months ago. Pike's operation had taken him, used his children as leverage, then discarded all three when Zaire refused to cooperate. The official story said Zaire was dead. But Cassian's instincts said otherwise. "I don't know where your mama is," Cassian admitted. "But I promise you this, I will find out, and if there's any chance he's alive, I will bring him home." "You promise?" Amari's voice trembled. "I promise." The twins exchanged another one of their silent conversations. Then Amari stepped forward, his small hand finding Cassian's much larger one. "Okay," he said simply, "we trust you." 3 words that carried more weight than any contract Cassian had ever signed. That night after the twins fell asleep, both in the same bed despite having two, Cassian stood in their doorway watching them breathe. Amari's arm was thrown over Khari, protective even in dreams. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. He opened it. A single photo appeared, blurry, taken from a distance but unmistakable. A man with purple hair, thin and exhausted, being led through a corridor by armed guards. The timestamp showed it was taken yesterday. "Zaire. Alive." Below the image a message. "The Omega you're looking for is in the Northside facility, basement level. He doesn't know his children survived. Thought you'd want to know. A friend." Cassian's hands tightened around the phone. Amari stirred in his sleep, making a soft sound. Cassian looked between the sleeping twins and the message, feeling the weight of 2 promises pulling him in different directions. He couldn't leave the boys, not yet, not when they just started feeling safe. But Zaire was alive, and somewhere in that facility he was suffering, believing his children were dead. Cassian made a decision. He typed a response, "Location details, everything you have." The reply came instantly, "Sending now, but Blackridge, that facility is owned by people who make Pike look like a street dealer. You go after them, there's no going back." Cassian looked at the twins one more time. "Good," he typed, "I wasn't planning on it." He hit send, then made another call, this one to Marcus. "I need a team," Cassian said quietly, "and I need to know everything about the Northside facility, every entrance, every guard rotation, every weakness." "When?" "Tomorrow night." "Boss, that's not enough time to." "Make it enough," Cassian interrupted. "Because I'm bringing that Omega home to his children, and anyone who gets in my way is going to learn what happens when you separate families." He ended the call and returned to the twins' doorway. Amari had rolled over, his hand reaching out across the gap between beds, searching for his brother even in sleep. Cassian understood that feeling now, the desperate need to protect, to keep your family close, to never let them be taken again. Tomorrow, he'd start planning the most dangerous operation of his life. Tonight, he'd keep watch over 2 boys who'd given him something he thought he'd lost forever. Purpose. Will Cassian rescue Zaire and reunite the family? Tell us what you think happens next. Morning light filtered through the twins' bedroom window, painting everything gold. Cassian sat in the hallway outside their door, back against the wall, watching Amari and Khari sleep. He hadn't moved all night. Couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them on that cardboard, freezing and forgotten. Never again. Amari stirred first, his brown eyes blinking open slowly. When he saw Cassian sitting there, a smile spread across his face, genuine, trusting, everything Cassian didn't deserve but would spend the rest of his life earning. "You stayed," Amari whispered. "I stayed," Cassian confirmed. Khari woke next, yawning and stretching. "Is this still real?" "Still real." Both boys climbed out of bed and padded over to where Cassian sat. Without hesitation, they settled on either side of him, Amari tucking himself under Cassian's left arm, Khari under his right. 3 weeks ago, Cassian Blackridge was the most feared man in Grayport City, untouchable, unmovable, built from violence and control. Now he was a father to 2 7-year-olds who taught him more about strength in 3 days than he'd learned in 30 years. "What are we doing today?" Khari asked. Cassian had meetings scheduled, operations to oversee, a rescue mission to plan for tonight that could get him killed or worse. But looking down at the twins, feeling their small bodies pressed against his sides, trusting him to keep them safe, none of that other stuff mattered. "Whatever you want," he said. They spent the morning exploring the neighborhood. Cassian walked behind as Amari and Khari discovered the park 2 blocks away, their laughter ringing out when they found the swings and slides. Other parents watched warily, recognizing Cassian, knowing his reputation, unsure what to make of him pushing children on swings. He didn't care what they thought. By afternoon, the twins were exhausted in the best way. They collapsed on the couch, one on each side of Cassian, fighting sleep because they were afraid if they closed their eyes, this dream would end. "We're really staying forever?" Amari asked for the 100th time. "Forever," Cassian promised. "And you're going to find Mama." "I'm going to find him." Khari's small hand found Cassian's. "Will you still want us after when Mama comes back?" The question revealed everything: the fear that they were temporary, that love was conditional, that safety could be taken away the moment it was no longer convenient. Cassian pulled both boys closer. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "I don't care what happens, I don't care who comes back or what changes, you two are mine now, nothing is going to change that, understand?" Tears spilled down Amari's cheeks. "Promise." "I promise." They fell asleep like that, tangled together on the couch. 3 people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and somehow created something worth protecting. Hours later, after the twins were tucked into bed, Cassian stood in his home office reviewing the Northside facility plans Marcus had compiled. The building was a fortress. Getting in would be nearly impossible. Getting out with Zaire would require a miracle. But Cassian had stopped believing in impossible the moment he knelt beside 2 freezing children in an alley. His phone buzzed. "Dr. Cross." "Just checking in," she said. "How are they?" "Happy, safe. And you?" Cassian looked at the facility blueprints, at the impossible odds, at everything he was about to risk. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," he said. After he hung up, Cassian walked back upstairs one more time. The twins were sleeping peacefully, Amari's arm thrown over Khari, both of them finally breathing easy. He thought about the man he'd been 3 weeks ago, cold, calculating, convinced that compassion was weakness and mercy got you killed. That man would have walked past the alley without looking back. But standing here now, watching 2 children sleep safely because he chose to stop, Cassian understood something fundamental had shifted. Power wasn't about how many people feared you. It was about what you chose to protect when the whole world told you to walk away. Tomorrow he'd storm the Northside facility, he'd face enemies who made Pike look like an amateur, he'd risk everything he'd built. But tonight 2 boys slept peacefully because one man decided they were worth stopping for. And somewhere in a dark facility, a purple-haired Omega was about to discover that his children had found a guardian who never gave up. Cassian pulled out his phone and sent one final message to Marcus. "We move at midnight, bring everyone, we're bringing Zaire home." He looked at the sleeping twins one last time, then back at his phone. Some promises were worth dying for. And family, the one you were born into and the one you chose, was worth everything. If this story moved you, if it made you believe in second chances and the power of choosing compassion over cruelty, then subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Because there are more stories like this, stories of broken people finding redemption, of families formed in fire, of love that refuses to quit even when the world says it's impossible. Drop a comment below and tell us what part hit you hardest. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Share this story. Inspire others. Remind the world that sometimes the most ruthless thing you can do is choose to care. We'll see you in the next story, where Cassian faces his most dangerous mission yet and discovers that bringing Zaire home is only the beginning of their journey. Until then, keep believing that every broken soul deserves a chance to heal, and every child deserves someone who won't walk away.